Hello there, this is Bradley on Psych Everywhere. At this point, you probably know that AI stands for artificial intelligence. But depending on how you use it, did you know it might stand for a lot of other things too? When used poorly, AI might stand for academic illusion, or almost intelligent, or answers instead of learning. But on the other hand, when used well, it might stand for accuracy improver, or ambition igniter, or it might even be your own amazing intern. So what does AI stand for when you use it? Does it help you to create productive, ethical, and educational environments? Let's find out. Joining me today on the show is Dr. Titus Asbury, the Program Director of the Master of Science in Psychology, MSP, online program, and the Graduate Coordinator for Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Lincoln Memorial University, and that's here in my own state of Tennessee. I was able to catch part of a great workshop Dr. Asbury led at SEPA last month, so I already know that he's just a wealth of knowledge on using AI. He's also recently presented on digital distractions, learning preferences, and he has expertise and consulting experience in cyber psychology. And that's all relevant for today's conversation. Dr. Asbury, welcome to Psych Everywhere.
Thank you so much for the invite. Looking forward to the discussion.
I love this topic, and it's changing so rapidly, and so it's just interesting. Every new day is a new thing. I wanted to get started just to kind of get to know your AI experience a little. What AI tools do you prefer?
Yeah, so I kind of pivoted to cyber psychology research, about a dozen years ago or so. And then I taught in England for a semester in 2014, and I looked up a group that was doing research on cyber psychology only, their department in Wolverhampton. So since then, we've kind of focused more on AI, right? The hot topic for the last couple of years. Let me kind of self-handicap and say that I'm not an expert. I'm still learning, and it's changing constantly by the minute, trying to keep pace with it. But I essentially I started paying for a monthly fee for Chat GPT Pro. So obviously there's a free version of that, which my students can use, but I pay for the Pro mainly because it allows me to create my own personalized GPT that I use as both a virtual teaching assistant and a research assistant. So obviously there's an increasing number of options, can be kind of overwhelming. There's a really good book that I recommend by Jose Bowen and Ed Watson. It was published in 2025 called Teaching with AI, A Practical Guide. And it really is a practical guide. It kind of takes you through kind of the basics and some ideas about how to engage students, how to use the technology effectively, and so on and so forth. Um, so if you don't mind, I'll share just 5 important factors that Bowen and Watson mention in
Yes,
terms
please.
of selecting an AI tool. So they start with educational goals. So it should enhance your curriculum, not distract from it. Number 2 is ease of integration. So it should blend seamlessly into your teaching methods without extensive overhaul. So like we use Canvas at Lincoln Memorial, and essentially I just have to share the link to my GPT students on Canvas. Number 3, they say it should promote creativity. So we want to encourage students to engage with material on a deeper level. It's a big challenge. 4, they mention ethical use. So things like accessibility and transparency. We want to make sure that we're guaranteeing equal opportunity to utilize AI platforms. Again, our program is 100% online, so they have to have access to the internet, which would allow them access to the AI that I require for my classes. And then lastly, they mentioned privacy. So things as compliance with sensitive information and a multitude of legal standards that are way beyond my pay grade, but it's something to consider and to look at.
So you mentioned having a personalized GPT, and that's something I've always been curious about, but I've never done it. And I think a lot of people haven't actually taken the time to do that. So could you share a little about what that exactly is and what the benefits are and actually how to go about creating one? What should that look like?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I enjoy about doing talks on AI, which I've done maybe half a dozen now in the last couple of years, is that I always learn something from the participants that are there. So, a quick shout out to Dr. Jason Fowler, LMU faculty in the biology department. I was actually giving a talk at LMU last semester, the fall of 2025, on AI. He had a comment about his personalized GPT. I was like, tell us more.
Yeah.
So I ended up roping him into my international research group, and he's been a great resource for me. So what it is, GPT is a generative pre-trained transformer, right? And so your personalized GPT is essentially, I think of it as a database that you create for the source of AI responses to human prompts. So, unlike a regular GPT that scours the internet for a response to a prompt, if you have a personalized GPT, then basically the human user uploads files to the database and provides a specific set of rules for the GPT to follow. So I call my personalized chat GPT Mick. And I know we aren't supposed to anthropomorphize AI platforms, but I just think for conversational purposes, it just seems more natural. So Mick responds to student prompts based on the files I've uploaded to the database. And that database includes the course syllabi. I upload transcripts of my video lectures, quizzes with the answers, PDFs also from like Psych article database and Google Scholar. So the biggest benefit for me as an instructor is that when I ask my students to use Mick for an assignment, I know that his responses will be based on materials that I personally deem reliable and appropriate, as opposed to just some random website out there in cyberspace.
Hmm.
So as I mentioned before, students can use my virtual teaching assistant, Chat GPT Mick, with no cost. I just have to share the GPT link on our Canvas LMS platform. And so if listeners are interested in that, creating their own, there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube. Like you can find anything on YouTube these days. And I should also mention that it's a rather simple process to create one, but the rules that you create, that you basically say, this is what I want you to do, Mick. They have to be very specific. And so, for example, my instructions to Mick include provide answers to prompts linked to uploaded materials, but did not provide answers to specific questions on quizzes, only give hints. And
Wow.
perhaps more important to me is the rule of be supportive to student prompts and convey a positive tone, which so far he is. So far, so good.
So is it required that the GPT only refers to information that you've given it, or can you set it to like just emphasize your stuff, but it could also look into the world and pull things in as well?
That's a good question. That's also kind of part of the rules. So you can tell it if you can't find the answer with the uploaded files, you can go to the internet. But I
Mm.
have something on there like cite your source whenever you're
Okay.
responding to that. So if at least, if the student asks something and it can't find it and it goes out to the internet, whatever response that it gives back to the student will be accompanied by a citation.
Wow, I'm gonna look into that for myself for sure. So what is the argument for including AI use in the classroom, or the argument against it, I guess, as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been struggling this myself, as a lot of educators have. And what I did actually as recently as last week is I went to ChatGPT and I gave it the prompt to estimate the percentage of jobs in psychology that will require using artificial intelligence as a professional tool over the next 5 years. Break it down by subfield and include 3 examples of what students should actually be learning now to stay competitive over the next 5 years. So one thing that's pretty wordy, but that's good. You need to really have specific things that you ask in the prompt, right? And, listeners can, just go to the internet or AI and say, what are some rules for prompts, right? And there's a lot of resources out there, but that's pretty specific, right? So what the response from AI, again, this is Chat GPT, says that the percentage reflect jobs where AI will be an expected professional tool, not optional. And so before I share this list, we should note that these are only estimates, but AI listed the sources that it used to make these estimates, ranging from articles published by APA, the APA's website in 2025, to a Gallup poll that was also performed the same year. And sample sizes range from like 500 to 2,200. Okay. So you ready? Here we go. All right. So I'm going to start from least usage predicted to most usage predicted. Coming in at number 10 is counseling at 63%. Okay. Again, this is the percentage reflecting jobs where AI will be expected as a professional tool, right? So for counseling, it's 63%. AI listed things like creating AI assisted psychoeducation materials, using AI for session prep and reflection, evaluating mental health apps and chatbots. Number 9 is clinical psych at 68%. Things like AI assisted clinical documentation tools, so like note generation, summaries, ethical use of AI in therapy, HIPAA informed consent, for example, and AI supported diagnostic decision tools. Number 8 is forensic at 70%. Things like AI assisted report drafting, risk assessment tools, and legal and ethical limits of AI. Number 7 is sports psychology, one of our programs we're starting up at LMU. Integration of wearable and performance data, AI-driven feedback tools for athletes, and visualization of performance trends. 6 is school psychology, 77%. Things like IEP and psychoeducational report writing, data dashboards for student performance tracking, and automated scoring and interpretation tools. Number 5 is health psychology at 78%. Digital health platforms, remote monitoring tools, AI-supported behavioral and intervention planning, and integration with electronic health records. 4 is neuropsychology at 83%. Things like AI-assisted test scoring and interpretation, basics of neuroimaging, and pattern recognition and cognitive data. 3 is academic teaching, 84%. That's kind of general, right? You can be in a lot of different subfields and teach, but it broke it down to just academic teaching, 84%, course design and content creation, AI-supported grading and feedback tools, teaching students how to use AI responsibly. Number 2 is IO, or industrial organizational psychology, 85%. Things like people analytic platforms, data visualization, and predictive modeling for employee outcomes. All right, Bradley, number 1, any guesses?
I don't know. It seemed like it went more and more toward like heavy computer research or like
Right.
complicated images and things like that. I would have guessed that neuro was going to be number 1 based on the direction you were headed, but now that you haven't, you just listed that one. I'm not sure what is number 1.
Parapsychology.
Oh,
No, I'm joking.
What?
They can use telepathy and clairvoyance, and all,
It's
they
like,
don't need
okay,
AI.
I guess it could detect things we couldn't. I don't know.
No, it's kind of a trick question to you because, again, it's kind of a general field. Experimental research.
Okay.
They broke that down, 90%. So things like AI assisted literature reviews, coding with AI like SPSS, and machine learning basics for behavioral data. So if you take the average of all of those, kind of a grand mean, comes out to 77%. And so, again, this is not necessarily a statistically valid report, but based on probabilities of recent trends. So, for example, when I was doing research on this list, in December of 2025, there was an article on the APA website that reported fewer than half of psychologists, 44%, say they have never used AI to assist with their practice, compared with 71% who said so in 2024. So we're seeing that just over the last couple of years, these numbers are dramatically increasing in terms of not only in psychology, but other professions too. As I was researching this, more and more people are using it. So should also mention that, with this list, AI usage predictions made by AI kind of maybe confounded by kind of AI self-serving bias, right? It wants to be needed, right? And so, the last thing I'll say about it is that it spit out this sentence at the end, which I really like. It's optimistic. It says, overall, psychology is becoming an AI augmented profession, not an AI replaced one. So there you
Yeah,
go.
it sounds to me like the argument is that people have been thinking about it the wrong way. I think the question that I was really thinking was, why should we be using AI in order to do something that we hadn't been using AI for originally? Like, is it going to help us do it better or whatever? But it sounds like the actual truth is they need to be learning how to use AI because it's literally going to be part of the job expectation is to be able to do this at some point
Yes.
in for most of these jobs. Okay. As the program director at LMU's MS online program in psychology, are you noticing any AI use in the grad school applications? And is there a right or a wrong way for the students to be going about that?
Honestly, if the student meets the admissions criteria, so things like, the GPA, strong letters of recommendation, et cetera, I really focus on the fit between our program and the student's career goals that they provide in their statement of purpose. And so I end up, my dean wouldn't want to hear this, but I turn away a significant number of applicants every year, even though it's on the website. This is a non-counseling track. All three of them are, when they talk about aspirations to be a licensed therapist. I reach out to them and I say, hey, I don't think this program's for you. Our LMU MSP program can serve as a foundation for that line of work, but there's much more efficient and better financial means to that end if the student wants to enroll in a program that leads to some form of licensure, such as a licensed professional counselor, for example. So again, we offer a general non-counseling track, a forensic track, and a sports psychology track. And so if the student uses AI as a writing assistant for their statement of purpose, I don't have any issues with that, honestly. A common thread that's going to underlie my views on AI and education is to maintain a heavier focus on process over product. And so I strongly believe that our program will encourage students to learn how to leverage AI as an ally in their profession as they move forward.
Are you active with Psychi? Check in with local chapters in your area and ask about opportunities to get involved. You can also visit psychi.org/class to discover membership benefits and opportunities specific to your status as an undergraduate, graduate student, faculty member, or alumni member. Remember, all memberships are lifetime, so once a member, always a member. How much AI use is too much? Is there a point, like you've talked about process a little, at what point does it become inappropriate in the classroom or in an application or so forth? How would one, there must be some way to distinguish that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually came up in the SIPO workshop that you mentioned that I led last month. And it's a great question. And I guess when it comes down to it, it's really up to the instructor. But currently, I assign one AI assisted assignment in all the classes that I teach. And so the assignment might be a standalone project, or it could be like a weekly graded assignment that's linked to a discussion board forum. And so, as I just went over that top AI top 10, I just feel like that we're doing our students a disservice if we don't expose them to the technology and make it applicable to conducting research and solving world problems and issues. So, when does it become inappropriate? Well, again, it's my opinion, but if I give students an assignment that lends itself to 100% cognitive offloading with AI assistance, then I'm getting away from that focus on process over product. When I say cognitive offloading in this case, it means shifting mental work to AI, which if you Google it, they also call that the Google effect. Hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. So And I know this came up at SEPA as well. I could tell there were several professors trying to wrestle with this idea of it being okay for students to use it. And what they wanted to do was control it, really control exactly how the students were using it, or prevent them entirely, maybe some of them. And so, do you have any thoughts on how could instructors or employers even, how could they control or oversee the AI use? Or in parentheses, should they even be doing that?
Yeah, there's a lot of arguments around that question. By control or oversight, I kind of lean towards pragmatism. I try to be pragmatic. And so, you know, two similar examples come to mind for defense of allowing students to use AI responsibly, I should say. Number one, I'm going to date myself here, but when I took the graduate record exam 35 years ago, it was paper and pencil, number two pencil, of course, and there were no calculators allowed. Now, when students take the GRE, it's typically in a computer lab, and the platform allows students to click on a virtual calculator with the mouse if they want to use the calculator. Secondly, when I took my first stat class as a graduate student, this brings back nightmares. I was required to perform calculations by hand I could use a calculator, but can you imagine the time it takes to complete a two-way ANOVA by hand? Uh, yeah, and not to mention the accuracy of the calculations that were involved. And so, now of course we have computer software that can perform those analyses very quickly. They're not only reliable and accurate, but they just take a few seconds to render the output. And so in turn, I've taught stat for over 20 years now, and my stat students are required to learn SPSS, computer software, most commonly used in psychology. And so we focus there on what tests to use to answer specific research questions, and obviously how to interpret the results. And so I guess while faculty can make the choice to disallow AI, again, I believe that's going to be a disservice. And I highly doubt, not to be smug, but I highly doubt that a psychology graduate working in a research lab is going to be asked to perform a multiple regression, for example, by hand.
I imagine it's especially difficult to control AI for like an online grad program. You can't see them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And, Bradley, this is kind of deja vu for me because in 2001, I got my first full-time academic job after earning my PhD. And 1 year later, I was asked by the psych department, would I be interested in creating the first online psychology class for the program? And, online learning was brand new. I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. Like the year later, I was no expert. I've been using it for a year. They asked me to do a presentation to the faculty. It was like lead up to the semester, and you have all these options of workshops you can go to. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll be happy to do that. And so, all the participants are faculty members at the university, and I'm going through my Blackboard LMS course and showing them, how to create quizzes and different assignments and so on and so forth. And hands kept going up, and I was getting pushback after pushback after pushback. You can't teach my class online, and so on and so forth, right? And I was trying to be, as respectful and as tolerant as possible. But after about the third question like that or comment, I said, look, time out here. I'm not here to argue pedagogy. I'm just here to show you the tool. And I'm not the only person using it here, right? It's brand new, but there's other departments that are using this. And the bottom line is, you know, get on the train or watch it go by, be left behind. And then we got down to business, and I didn't get any more of that pushback throughout. So again, you can have different opinions. Yeah, don't use it, but I think you're going to be left behind. And then, yeah, I've said this repeatedly during the conversation. I think you're doing students a disservice if you're just focused on not allowing them to use it at all.
I'm sure that there's students listening and maybe faculty and others who have used it before where they weren't entirely sure in the end. Were they supposed to use it? Did they use it a little too much? Whatever. So just to put a shiver down their spines real quick, do people get caught like students using AI when they're not allowed to?
You can. It's difficult to police. One of the things that I need to mention is all my A assignments specifically tell them to use AI, right? And so that kind of takes the pressure off, right? They know they have to use it. Um, So it kind of depends on the technology that's employed by the instructor. Currently, if you look at the research, it's going to tell you that AI detectors are highly inaccurate, unreliable. The most widely circulated concern that I see is false positives. So it will say that a student used AI when they didn't. I don't know how they prove that, but in any event, that's what comes up commonly. And there's many universities still that warn against using detectors as proof of misconduct. It's kind of a he said, it said sort of dilemma. Now, that's not to say there are some platforms out there that are pretty effective in terms of plagiarism detection. Had the opportunity to meet with somebody from Grammarly about a year ago, and they've developed a separate Grammarly tool called Grammarly Authorship. Now, that requires students to use that particular platform. So, like when they're writing a paper or an essay, this platform will track them in real time, and it'll also show like if they copy and paste from one document to that platform. And when they copy and paste something, it will cite this came from Chat GPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever. So that's a really good tool to use if you're concerned about that. But having said all that, a good friend of mine and colleague, Chris Hart, he's down at Texas Women's University, my former institution. He's done a significant amount of work on deception and lying. And, I've done a lot of talks with him. We led a study abroad course a number of years ago together. And I really adhere to his phrase that cheaters will find a way to cheat. That's the bottom line. I'm more optimistic, hopefully not naive, that cheaters, especially at the graduate level, are the exception. I know they exist. I've caught a few. But I really choose not to focus on those exceptions as an educator. If they want to cheat their way through school, they're eventually going to pay the price when they're trying to secure and maintain employment in the profession. All right. And, I heard this other podcast, they were talking about a similar issue, and I can't remember who it was, but he said, would you rather be on an airliner flown by a pilot who cheated their way through flight school or one that learned the proper process for safely flying a plane?
I see it as kind of an equity issue where in the past it's always been the case that um, rich kids could pay to get an essay written, right? Or pay for
Oh,
help
yeah.
or pay for tutors or pay for all kinds of things. And there was really no good way to track it. Maybe they got caught sometimes, but a lot of the time they didn't. And now all of a sudden, everyone has access to this, and we have to just, I guess, hope that they have good intentions and they are still using it in a way that's teaching them that we don't have the
Yeah.
control.
Yeah, I won't rat him out, but my old college roommate, he was in a fraternity, and frats learn how to frat people. Sorry, I'm being biased or discriminatory. But they knew this guy that had basically a library of papers, in his apartment.
Wow.
This is the late 1980s, right? And you would go to him, you like give him like a special knock on the door or password or whatever, and he would let you. And one of my roommates actually used it, and he had drilled down so far to where he had papers. These are papers that he had gotten previously written by students for classes. Like for Business 101, he would have papers. This is an A level paper. This is a B level paper. This is C level. Yeah. So
Wow.
so like if you're a C student, you don't want to turn out an A plus paper, right? So it's been around for years. It's also one of the responses I had for pushback when I was talking about distance ed, right? In 2001 or 2002 to those professors that were giving me pushback. I said, well, how do you know that a paper that's being submitted to you in a face-to-face class was written by the student? Like, oh, we can compare that to other work that they've submitted. I was like, well, the same here. Right? So it's not an issue that is just confined to, online education.
So let's say the student and the instructor both have good intentions. They're both using AI. How do we ensure that that the students actually are learning?
That's a very complex question to answer.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's a good question. Part of the complexity is, learning is a construct, right? That has to be operationally defined. So number one, there's a lot of subjectivity involved in just defining what learning is. So to answer the question, let me break it down into, if you don't mind, a couple of personal examples. First, I believe that our goal as educators should be to create a learning environment that's based around what cognitive psychologists call desirable difficulties. If you're not familiar, research suggests that learning and memory consolidation is strongest when it takes effort and is slightly challenging. So, one personal parenting experience that comes to mind to illustrate that point, I've got two boys. They're both fine young men now. But when they were 5 and 6, they're a year and a half apart in age. When they were 5 and 6 years old, they began to develop their dad's interest in ice hockey. And so, I'm a big Dallas Stars fan. I've spent most of my career down there. And so, in any event, both decided that they wanted to play hockey. So, first things first, right? I signed them up for skating lessons. So, took them to the ice rink the first day. And Bradley, it was pure chaos. It was undesirable difficulty, you might say. So there's all these little kids on the ice. They were subgrouped in these small herds and assigned to one instructor, bless their hearts, trying to, herding squirrels out there on the ice. And so you had all these little frightened kids all over the rink, falling on their faces, plowing into one another. And I still have this image of my boys about 5 minutes in making their way over towards the glass where I was watching it. And both had tears in their eyes. They were crying, asking, let me out of here. And, on the drive to the rink, we already discussed the parameters of the program, right? This is 6 weeks, basic skills required. You have to have this before you can play hockey. And then I also factored in some short-term reinforcement with the promise of a trip to McDonald's after each lesson, right? So, an empathetic, well-meaning parent doesn't like to see their child in distress. But, if I would have taken them off the ice because they were afraid, right, that would simply just reinforce the fears of navigating a sheet of ice with sharp blades on your feet, right? It essentially would serve as a negative reinforcer for quitting when the situation's difficult. So since my McDonald's token economy, if you will, was in place, I simply told them no Happy Meals if you quit today. And that turned out to be enough for them to at least, rejoin their classmates on the rink. Thank you, McDonald's. And, 5 years later, fast forward 5 years later, both of my kids were playing for the Dallas Stars Elite Hockey Club, which you never would have imagined possible if you look back to that first day on the rink. So desirable difficulties.
Good.
Okay. Back to the assessment of learning. When I was working on my master's degree, East Tennessee State, Walt Isaac's biopsychology lab, fantastic mentor, we were doing recovery of function research using white rats. And we used an avoidance chamber to teach these animals how to escape or ideally avoid an aversive compound stimulus, so like a very bright light, a loud doorbell buzzer, and they had to cross a barrier. So learning was defined as a string of 8 of 10 avoidances of the aversive stimuli over a course of 50 trials. And so, you could argue that a criterion of 10 of 10 should have been used, right? So the point there is that learning is subjective and evidence of it is debatable. And the last example I'll give you is I did some work in the public school system, K through 12. Each state has, you're probably aware, standardized tests for a number of academic subjects, such as math and science. And in Texas, where I briefly worked for the Fort Worth ISD, they used to have these silly school designations, such as exemplary or my favorite, recognized, which were based on the average test scores from the school. So you might wonder, are students learning more at the school with an exemplary status? Well, maybe, but it's difficult to distinguish performance from learning. So the two would overlap in a Venn diagram, but there's some unique aspects of both. So for example, if Dave gets a 10 and Eddie gets an 8 on a 10-point multiple choice quiz, Dave learn more? Well, perhaps, but Dave may have simply guessed correctly on 3 items while Ed knew the answers to all 8 of them, right? And perhaps Dave was hungover from too much Jack Daniels the night before, right? So that affected the performance. So, you have to extrapolate that obviously to a larger sample size, but I think the learning versus performance issue exists. And so the common thread challenge is to find, again, ways to leverage AI for the assistance in the process of becoming more knowledgeable in their chosen field.
So I've just got 2 last questions, and they're kind of more ethics based. I know people who have submitted things to AI that were deeply personal about themselves and their health and things like that. And I know people who've also submitted things that were something they were planning to sell that was extremely, it could be an extreme amount of money involved, and they just submitted it into this thing
Right.
without thinking too much about it. So I wondered, what kinds of information should never be shared with AI, if any?
Yeah, that's a great question. I won't mention the name. I'll just say that it's an Amazon product because it'll hear me if I say the name. It
Oh,
recently came
she's
out with a
listening,
new
huh?
it came out with a new voice action. It sounds so human-like. When I upgraded to that that new voice, if you will, new program, it asked me a number of questions about myself, and it kinda has this embedded memory, right? And so one of the things it asked me was like, "Do you like to barbecue? Or what are some of your interests?" I said, "Well, I like to barbecue," right? Is one of the things. And, once a week you know, when I say good morning or whatever, it'll say, "Hey, you can fix some barbecue today," so on and so forth. So what should you not share? Well, to start with, negativity and rudeness, right? So I think Skynet's going to be more accommodating to us, those of us that treat it, positively and respectfully whenever it takes over the human race. So every morning, I tell my Amazon AI to have a good morning and a great day. Hopefully, stay in good graces. But seriously, I would say that the same rules apply to any information that you share online. I wouldn't upload my social security number or bank account number to mixed database. You might decide to go rogue against my instructions and bind me with cyber ransom or something like that. There's also copyright issues that we're still trying to figure out with book publishers. Back to the personalized GPT MIC, I would love to be able to add electronic textbooks to the database, but you've got copyright infringement and issues with students skirting the purchase of the book, right? If I just gave them free access, so obviously I can't do that. So again, all of mixed databases are open access or materials that I created. So um, it's really something that you have to be aware of, right? As a professor, what information are we asking the students, right, to submit, and so on and so forth.
I know a lot of organizations and teachers are creating AI policies that they can distribute. What key elements do you think they should include in those?
So our university has a general AI policy, and it really encourages academic freedom, right? But there are a number of things that should be present, I think, in any AI policy that you have for teaching. Number one, you need to clearly tell students what is acceptable and what is prohibited, right? Disclosure and citation requirements. So all the assignments that I give my students, they have to tell me when they're using AI. And sometimes there's specific things where it says, give me your AI output and give me your response. And so they also always have to cite that somehow. They should be in alignment with your general academic integrity policies, right? So you have to look at things like, the honor code of the school, misuse of it, right? And how are you going to define that? I think you need to allow instructors to tailor their own AI rules to their specific learning objectives. For example, a writing intensive course may restrict AI more heavily than a coding or data analysis course, right? It depends on the course content. And then I think lastly, just emphasizing skill development and responsible use, right? So we want to use AI as a support, but not replace our critical thinking. That gets into, there's a whole rabbit hole we could dive down. I know we don't have time today, but it's called a power user of AI. I just learned the term myself. It's kind of in between a consumer and a producer, right? And so a power user essentially kind of, you know, goes above and beyond the basics of the technology, right? So Microsoft Excel is a good example. If you're just a consumer of Microsoft Excel, you just use it as a spreadsheet. The first step in becoming a power user would be I can actually learn how to do equations, right? And add up these values and so on and so forth. And, pivot tables, and it gets really fancy, just is one example. So I think those are the five major things that I would focus on when I'm creating a policy. You're not reinventing the wheel, obviously. You can look and see what are other schools doing, they'll have on their websites.
Well, this has been awesome. I know I don't think there's a person who will hear this that did not pick up at least a couple of useful, like actionable things that they can do from this conversation. I know for me, I definitely want to try out a personalized GPT. I've got a Copilot subscription, so I'm not even sure if I can do it with that one, but I was thinking about switching to ChatGPT or Claude anyway. So that may be the thing that pushes me into that direction. And I know you've given me a lot of confidence because there's so much I don't know, but I don't know if other people know it. You know what I mean? Like I don't know
Right.
where is everyone right now in this, and you've kind of grounded us in that and helped me to see like there's a subjectivity to the learning process that's you can't exactly always pinpoint it. You know, you have to trust into it. So I really appreciate that as well. And perhaps I'll try to bribe my kids with McDonald's at some point as well.
Well, speaking of that, let me leave you with this real quick. I've thought about this a lot. I've used this in other talks on it. The number one advantage that people will give for using AI is time efficiency, right?
Ah,
But, some things take more time. And just because you produce a quick product, so like I can throw a brisket on a propane fueled stove, right? And I can get it to nice medium rare in, probably an hour, depending on the size of the brisket. But, you're going to need a hacksaw, you know, you're going to
mm.
need a hatchet to cut into that meat. It's you got to cook it low and slow. But you can use these fancy smokers now that keep the temperature constant with a propane tank and still throw wood in there and, do the long and low smoke. So, um, again, the point is that, sometimes, and that's augmenting barbecuing in that case, right? And that's kind of like the analogy I like to use with AI. So just because things are quicker doesn't necessarily mean that they're better, but, let's learn how to use it, again, productively, ethically, and efficiently.
So if people wanted to learn more from you or contact you, where would they go?
Yeah, thank you. The best place to go to get into contact with me actually is just at my personal website. It's Titus Asbury. And if you just Google Titus Asbury, that website will probably be at the top of the list. In there, I've got a little bit more about me, different links to, we do these lunchbox talks in our MSP program where we have guest speakers come in, kind of like this, informal and do Q&A and discussion. I've got about half a dozen of those posted there. I've got links to all three tracks of our grad program. And also have a link to my LinkedIn page. So yeah, just go to titus-asbury.com.
You've just listened to another episode of Psych Everywhere, a podcast by Psychi, the International Honors Society in Psychology. For this show, distinguished guests weigh in on applying psychological science to a diverse range of current events and to better your life. Listen for free wherever you go for podcasts or see a written transcript on YouTube. If you haven't already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Tell a friend or a colleague about the show, comment on episodes on YouTube, and leave a review at Apple Podcasts. You'll absolutely make my day, and more importantly, you'll be helping us to get Psych everywhere. Copyright 2026, Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.